then you're like, oh, you can do anything with a bike. It can take you anywhere, just like sailing. I went from 1 finger braking to 2 finger braking to 3 finger braking by the end of the 24 hours. I thought I'd get shot. How do you overcome every single voice in your head that's telling you to stop? I couldn't find my limit and started to realize like, oh, my limit is death. Like you literally can push your brain or body until it can't go any further. Like that's the real limit here.
"24 hours, 55,000 metres of descent, a world record. But pushing your limits doesn't stop at the finish line. Annie Ford isn't just chasing records, she's riding for something bigger. From an Everest challenge to crossing New Zealand on 2 wheels, her journey is as much about purpose as it is about performance. In this episode, she shares what it takes to test your body, trust your instincts, and turn adventure into advocacy. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button, as it will help us grow the channel and keep bringing you awesome guests. All right, on with the show. Annie Ford, welcome to the Downtime Podcast. How are you doing?
Good morning, Chris. I'm fantastic. Sitting here in Queenstown, having the time of my life as usual.
Nice. You seem to have that pretty sussed. How are the forearms? First question.
Recovered. They took a while, about a week, but forearms are feeling strong. Had a ride on the bike yesterday. Still need a bit more recovery by the feel of it.
Amazing. So this was the second time that you've done a 24-hour descent world record. So start off, tell us what you learnt from the first one that you've changed in your kind of preparation and approach for the second one.
Oh, great question. I learned that bike setup is key. The first time around, I did it on a Santa Cruz Nomad, and although it's a really nice, agile, long travel bike, for a downhill world record, you gotta upscale to the V10 to give yourself the maximum opportunity to get the best number available. So we upgraded to the V10, made it like a lounge chair. It was super soft and but like some really good softness up in the upper travel, because a lot of the track is braking bumps.
Okay.
And then also played with like tire pressure, played with braking setup, and the brakes were really intense for my weight, and that resulted in greater heat dissipation and also less wear and tear on my hands. So the first time round, I went from 1 finger braking to 2 finger braking to 3 finger braking by the end of the 24 hours. And this time round, 1 finger was all I needed the entire time.
Interesting. Were you on Mavens this time?
I was on Mavens. I started out with organics for that just extra effectiveness, but I went down to sintered copper just to ease that braking intensity just a little bit, and also had a 220 rotor up the front, which was something I had to learn how to ride. It's so much more intense, and gapping into rock gardens, you risk going over the bars because any kind of braking was so intense. But after a couple of weeks, got it dialed down, and the bike was just a dream. I also put on a steering damper, a Paddy Melling steering damper, and the more I dialed it up, the less fatigue. So it almost became like, it reduced all the chatter, and learnt so much that first time round. Also, making sure you got the right weather window. The first time was in torrential rain, and after we got the record, 100 laps, I pulled the pin. The risk of breaking a collarbone or a concussion was so high, given the track became like peanut butter, and you've got a lot of rock features and slabs where your balance is required in order to get through them safely. And I was having some spicy moments. So this time around, found an awesome weather window. We had hero dirt. We had a tiny bit of fog, which actually really helped the soil retention, and fast rolling. We just couldn't have had better conditions or a better crew. Learned heaps, brought it forward, and that resulted in blowing the doors off the existing record.
Yeah, good work. What about physical prep for something like that? Because you're obviously we'll talk about your other challenges in a bit, but you've obviously got, good legs and a good engine, what about like I would assume upper body fatigue becomes almost the most significant part of this challenge. Like, how did you prepare physically?
Yeah, I think with a challenge like this, if you fail to prepare, you've got to be prepared to fail. And challenges like this are primarily psychological as well. The repetitive nature of a short lap can be wearing. And so it wasn't only prioritizing the gym and discipline around food and nutrition and time on the bike. It was mentally working towards, for me, it's positivity. That's a big driver and enables me to do my best work. So, for example, when the pain comes, you're kind of welcoming it rather than, oh, shit, here we go. When the arm pump kind of kicked in, my interpretation of arm pump wasn't, this is going to suck for the next 60, 80, 100 laps. It's going to be, we're deep in this now. We're like on our way, like welcome to the cause. and it became part of life. And it wasn't this thing that you resisted. It was because it was an inevitability. It's going to happen. And it made my life so much easier out there when push came to shove. But in terms of like the physicality, I joined the gym for the first time in my life. That was a game changer. Reese at Apogee coaching, he gave me like a 3-day-a-week gym program to focus on all the muscle groups that are integral with downhill mountain biking. Okay. So upper body, a lot of squats and holds and weights. I am like a inverted triangle right now. Like my arms have never been stronger or bigger, and the endurance associated with them is like the stamina is there. But also just time on a bike, the months leading in, probably 3 months before I knew I'd be dropping in like at least 1,000 meters a day of descending, and then like literally every day, and I could ramp that up on some days and have rest days, but it was like 7,000 meters a week kind of thing. And then would be ramping up to 10,000 meters a week. And the few weeks before the descending date, I did 10,000 meter days. So only a few, you don't need to do many, but I wanted to check in that I had, at least a quarter of the existing world record available to me in my body. And are there any niggles? Are there any things that I have forgotten about that start to ramp up when you're deep in the hole? Because that's like 25 laps of coronet. So and you're punching them out to get them done in daylight and with crowds. So a few big days, but 7 days of rest, you feel like a superhuman. Like, oh my gosh, walking into that start line because you're so fatigued for so many months in the lead up. To actually get a solid break. I tapered for about a month. I could not believe how strong I felt, and that absolutely translated to not only getting the goal, but within about 40 laps I was like, I can get the goal and so much more. I'm feeling exceptional. We've done everything right. And how good. Like, not only the best day on the hill, but had a really great outcome. Everyone had huge days and awesome bonds formed out there. Just the best time in a private kind of bike park, night laps, everyone's squealing at each other. We've got tunes over the chairlift. It was just incredible, mate.
That sounds amazing.
Stash Space Rails is the ultimate way to store your bikes. You can get more bikes into less space. It's really easy to fit, it's really easy to use, get to whatever bike you want exactly when you need it. Downtime viewers get 10% off their entire order by heading to stashproducts.co.uk/downtime and using the code downtime, all in capitals, at the checkout. Upgrade your bike storage today.
And you talk about the mental side of this, right? And the importance of that, which I completely understand. But you make it sound really easy, like, oh, I've got arm pump, that's mint, right? I'm in it. How, when you're actually in the thick of that and it's starting to kick in and you're starting to hurt, how are you managing to like manifest those positive thoughts? Because it is very easy to get sucked into the negative side of things, which I think is probably natural. I don't know, but a lot of people go that way.
I completely agree with you. I think it is quite a natural inclination is to focus on what's bad, because that's what's dangerous and that's what's going to hurt us. And I find the psychology behind these big challenges absolutely fascinating, and it's one of the reasons I do them. So we are far more capable than we think. And how do you overcome the physiological and the mental handbrakes when they arise? How do you overcome every single voice in your head that's telling you to stop? And if I think you're driven by ego, like, you've got to leave that shit at the door, because when the crucibles come and the suffering comes, that's when you quit. For me, I've learned that to stay in the game, you have to have a really good purpose. And I've learned my biggest drivers are, these opportunities enable you to live life in its most vibrant state. It enables you to have incredible connections, like deep connections with the crew out there, like lifelong bonds. And then lastly, like the biggest reason I can transfer from negative to positive is the cause driving this entire event, which was to hopefully make the planet better than what I entered into. But the psychological switch takes practice. It's not something that is easy, but it becomes easier, like any muscle. And the neurological wiring that comes with, with whatever pain arises, whatever narrative arises, if someone says something to you that's just, toxic or unhelpful, how do you switch your brain over? And like, it starts for me with, kind of like a gratitude practice every day, every single day, every morning, like 3 things, unique things about what I'm stoked about. But also when I listen to that voice of how much longer, like, when are we done? This hurts. And your brain's always monitoring how much further you got to go. But if you stay in the moment, it's pretty bloody easy. It's really simple. You literally are just rolling down a hill on a bike. Like, it's almost offensively simple if you eradicate all the faff and shit and like judgment and extrinsic stuff, and you just go back to the absolute basics, like, what is the next thing I need to do? And just do that. Simplification, and rather than getting overwhelmed with what's to come, just stay here. And that's all it was for 24 hours. There was a few moments where you're just like, just 6 more hours of this, but it's going to end. It's not forever. Like anything, it passes. And I think with practice, that's why heaps of time on the bike beforehand is crucial. But also, I became very protective of that psychological state that I'd fostered to the lead up. And I became very protective of what I let into that space, what I saw, watched, what I read, what I consumed, who I was around was highly selective, and became more and more so, to the point where I became intolerant of anything less, which is quite unlike me. I'm very open and welcoming. However, if I was listening to gossip or a shitty conversation, I'd walk away from it. That's not going to help me be the best version of myself for the cause. And you ease afterwards, and you let, you reduce the intensity of that protection. But God, just the headspace entering that challenge, but also that continued on afterwards is pretty second to none. It's an incredibly positive space, but it's with effort, and it's not something that just happens. It's very trained and prioritized, and then with a lot of discipline maintained.
Yeah. Do you use a meditation practice at all to kind of help? Like, meditation is all about being aware of your thoughts, I think, and being able to catch a negative thought and decide how you're going to respond to it, rather than just letting it do its thing. Is that something you've used, or have you found other ways without that?
This is so close to my heart, hey. I think we often forget that each and every moment we have this with us, and all the baggage it carries, and all the conditioning and all the programming that we've inherited. about 5 years ago, I decided to do a Vipassana, which is a 10-day silent meditation retreat. Before that, I had not meditated a day in my life.
You like to go all in, don't you?
Mate, go hard. Like, if you're going to do it, go for it. And the night before, I was like, I'll give it a go. And sat down on my bed and was like, oh, what have I signed up for? Chucked on a timer and sat there. I was like, this is taking forever. I was like replanning my life. And then I looked at the clock and 3 minutes had passed. I was like, what have I signed up for? Like 10 days of 4 a.m. to 9 p.m. constant meditating and eyes closed, no talking to anyone. I was horrified with what I'd kind of committed to. And those 10 days were phenomenal. And I'd like to do one again because of the practice that became so well-founded, and your awareness and the influence of what's around you. Again, everything we eat is a form of food, whether that's what we see or what we read or who we talk to, like it's all being processed. And that was incredibly fundamentally profound in everything I've done since. I quit my job, sold my house, sold my car, moved overseas, started traveling, rode a bike around, and all of these things that I was so scared to do. And realizing fear is often out of proportion and often at the forefront of many of our decisions. Not excitement or possibility or learning or growth. It's this big building block we put right at the front. And similarly with when you're able to put that in its place and see things for as they are, not all the things that could possibly go wrong, there's the fear or the opportunity to jump and see where that leads you is just incredibly exciting. And the opportunities that arise from that and have snowballed from that is like highly recommended.
Yeah, amazing. And we'll get stuck into some of your other bits and pieces along the conversation. Before we move on from the 24-hour event, even if you weren't in that amazing positive headspace, I think you made a wise choice in bringing the Energizer Bunny, Jackson Goldstone, along with you. And Bailey, and there was that huge crew you had around you. Must have been a huge part of it. I'd personally be a bit intimidated having to ride laps with Jackson all day, but I can imagine he brings a good vibe to something like that. It was cool that you had so many amazing people there, part of it with you. That must have made a big difference.
Oh, it would have been literally impossible without the team that made it up the hill that day. There was a small army of about 40 to 60 people that enabled that record. And whether it was providing food or massaging the arm pump or witnessing at 2 a.m. to make sure that these laps were happening, the riders that were there for me through those 24 hours the caliber was off the show, like utterly ridiculous. And again, this is why Queenstown is next level for these types of challenges, because everyone is here and that was a week of Magaza Fest as well. So there's so many people in town, but holy moly. I was also very concerned for Jackson to have to go as slow as I was intending, but he's just got this positivity and this grin, and he's just stoked to help. Like, when do you need me? I'll be there. Just don't ever, just tell us what you need. And so for 24 hours, Jackson, Bailey, and his partner Emma were on site helping in any ways that they could. Jackson was my favorite person to be led by because I found it a lot less the cognitive requirements to follow a wheel were far less. So having someone in front is really good. But a lot of people get excited and, they just drop you because I've got to maintain a really steady, consistent pace and not get injured. So Jackson found my pace, held my pace, and showed me excellent lines that when you're that deep, you just start to get it done and you're not thinking that clearly, you're getting pretty clumsy. but he would show me wonderful lines and he'd be like, switch here. So you'd switch your feet. I just didn't have to think while he was towing me, or sit down here, and I'd be sitting down like, oh yeah, right. The quads are getting pretty work. So he is so aware, and the generosity. He did over 40 laps, the first one and all the way to the last. He was there supporting, helping, as were so many others. Like a mate here, Henry, he did 66 laps of the 133. Whoa. He did almost half off the couch. Like, it was like, this is just so much fun. And it was an excellent time. Like, that was a priority, is to enjoy ourselves and squeal at each other. And anytime Jackson blew up a corner in front of me, it was like epic, of like good changes and exciting. So we had an amazing crew and wouldn't change a thing. They were outstanding, and that's part of it, is the team that you've got with you, and that was second to none for me.
Yeah. And was the hardest element like the forearm fatigue? I've seen photos of your arms like so heavily K-taped towards the end of it. And I think you've got some loss of sensation in your fingers from a previous sailing experience. Like, is that a benefit or a hindrance in something like this?
Yeah, very, very good question. We knew the arm pump would be the biggest issue, given my experience the first time around. That became excruciating on the trail bike. Like, you're gritting your teeth for like 20 or 30 laps, and there's areas of the track that you are horrified about. So we taped from the thumb all the way down to, one, support my wrist through all the jarring, but also to support the arm pump and to try and restrict it a little bit. And holy moly, yes, the arm pump was the hardest thing to physically work through, the pain of that. And the swelling in my hands became quite challenging as well. Just this amount of action on your braking finger, like I'm still bruised there when I brake. I can still feel that there's a lot of impact to the tendon there. I didn't lose as much sensation this time. I think the hyper flexible bars, good grips, and the steering damper were just, the front end of that bike was dialed. But in terms of, I had a little niggle on my ankle, but switching it up eased that, and then it passed. Like anything, like a lot of these pains arise and then they drop away again. Like, lower back was, oh, here we go. Like, this is going to be there for the rest of the time, but then it passed off again. It's awesome you just kind of keep going, and a lot of the stuff that arises, bar the arm pump, that just got worse, eh?
That just escalates.
No way around that bad boy. But yeah, I had anti-inflams. I don't usually have any kind of medication, but we had Ewan, the doctor on site from Action Sports.
Ewan Spirits.
Yep, he was nice. Amazing. Like, not only did he join me for some laps, he was just like the most outstanding person to have in the lead up and during. He kept me safe, and I very grudgingly agreed that if he had to call it, I would stop, but he thankfully never had to, just in terms of if a concussion happened, or he kept an eye on nutrition and protein requirements and creatine. But on site, he was just awesome. Like, he helped me load my bike every time, so I didn't have to do 133 deadlifts to get the bike on the chairlift. These little 1%ers that resulted in 30 or 40% easier than otherwise. But yeah, arm pump, hey, and it's so hard to train for. Moto riders know all about it, but in terms of being on a bike, it's really hard to get into the depths where it arises, especially if you're training heaps and your arms are really jacked. But hey, after 40 to 50 laps, it's there.
And where did you end up? Was it like 50-something thousand meters? It was insane.
Yeah, the goal was 50,000 meters, and we had a fundraising target of $50,000, a meter, $1 kind of thing, to generate funds to regenerate Coronet Peak with native forests, how it was. But yeah, so 50,000 meters had a really nice ring to it, and it was 9,000 meters more than the existing world record. That was a lot more. I was really concerned and didn't think that I'd actually get there. I was really nervous about it. But not only did we get it, we got another 5,000 on top of it. We hit 55,000 meters and something vert over 24 hours. So happy days. The team did it.
Insane. Good work, mate. And I want to find out a little bit about like how you ended up here, because I think there's a lot to dig into in that story. I think we have to go back a bit. You grew up in Tasmania, studied marine and Antarctic sciences, and I think surfing was your first love, right?
Mate, you've done your research. Yeah.
Yeah.
Growing up in Tassie, you're really at the interface of wilderness. It's at the end of the bloody planet, similar here in Queenstown. So in every direction, you've got incredible ocean and wild places. Like a third of Tasmania is World Heritage Area. That is really hard to access. So in every direction, you've got adventure, and I think that's always really deeply resonated with me. Always been drawn to kind of extreme environments, which is why I studied Antarctic sciences. I was like, where's the coolest place you can go on the planet? I was like, yeah, that's a good start. So that adventurous spirit, I think, has always been there, and Tasmania only dialed that right up. But like, given I was always in the ocean anyway, I was like, well, I love it. I want to be in it, under it, all over it. And studied my honours and masters there in Tasmania. And surfing was, it just is so immersive. It's an amazing experience to chase the elements and hopefully find them lined up occasionally and jump in there. But that really did foster a deep care for these places, especially with the foundation of my degree. In my lifetime, I was seeing some pretty significant changes in those environments, and similarly in Antarctica, where you would talk to these salty old sailors and how these glaciers had receded insane amounts, and how the Northwest Passage was now sailable pretty much all year round because of the reduction in sea ice. And there in Tasmania, we've got an extension of a current that's really nutrient poor and really warm, which is pushing all of our species further south, but they've got nowhere to go. So we're the last stop on the bus kind of thing. And so with these like physical challenges, which I love and adore, it's really nice to be able to hopefully give back to those things that I deeply care about. And although, yes, I left that world of marine sciences because I wanted to continue growing in all these different directions, that's still very close to my heart. And although I can't be there present in a 9-to-5 job, I can still contribute to them through these many and varied challenges. But yeah, Tasmania, the Medina Bike Park got built about 7 years ago now, 6 or 7 years ago. And I'd never mountain biked before Medina Bike Park popped up. And I was like, what is this awesome thing I keep hearing about? And rolled out there, and I was like, there are a whole bunch of hot single guys out here on bikes, and they're all switched on. They're all from everywhere else on the planet. And I was like, what? I'll jump on. I'll have a go. One, because there's some absolute beautiful humans out here that I wouldn't mind spending some time with. But then also, it got me in the mountains, which I hadn't spent any time in, despite being in one of the most beautifully mountainous old growth location on the planet. I spent all my time at the coast. So Medina brought me inland, and the skill of riding a bike enabled me to be under these giant trees and out on these forestry roads that would go swimming on afterwards, and up into the mountains, and it just blew me away. I was so addicted to mountain biking immediately, and I put the surfboard down. It started gathering dust for the first time in, a decade, and bikes became everything. And you think you've got it narrowed down when you're like, oh yeah, I'll get a dual suspension kind of Norco sight. And then you're like, oh, you can do anything with a bike. It can take you anywhere, just like sailing. As long as you've got the energy to fuel it, anywhere that there's a road, you can access. It's such a leveler. And the opportunity that skill set brought to where I could point my that adventurous kind of drive was super exciting. And COVID hit. We all rode Maydena a heap because Tasmania went on as usual. It was all like very, very lucky. So everyone's skill set went through the roof because that's all we did. And then all I kept hearing about from everyone was about Queenstown and Whistler and these locations on the planet that just did mountain biking to a whole nother level. I couldn't imagine it getting any better, but as soon as I could, I booked a flight here to Queenstown. And yeah, the rest is history. This place just takes your ideas and it dials them further up. You'd go and jump off a bridge here and people are like, but you could have backflipped it, hey? Like that, like what's the next level? And so, I remember chatting to a mate here about riding through New Zealand, and he was like, why don't you just go from tip to tip instead, like Auckland to Queenstown? That's cool, but you could just add a little bit either side and then you're doing the whole country. So that was the next plan, and these things snowball. Everyone that wants a good physical challenge does an Everest here. There's no bears or cougars to deter your night laps. So I think that's a good start. And so then went on to do Everests and some big rides, which really redefined what I thought I could do physically. I'm not an endurance athlete. That's arguable now, but it's a place that really broke down these limiting beliefs, and you are what you say you are. And I think these challenges enabled me to push my boundaries, but in a way that was so supported. And you can ask people what tire choice, you can ask people what I should be eating, how to be helping myself get through these challenges to the best potential. And then people show up and you don't do a single lap alone. Like, that is outstanding. And this community is incredible. And I don't think any of us could be doing what we're doing without the community that support these insane ideas, but also make them bigger and better and bring heat to the fire. This place is outstanding, but that's where it's all started, was in Tassie on a bike, riding around these forests that, that dialed up care for places, but also care for yourself and how you can outlet this energy and access to incredible places, which a bike just does to a whole different degree.
Yeah, for sure.
And far more accessible than so many other forms of transport.
Yeah, and to get from Tasmania to the Queenstown community, there's a bit of a path, and I think there's a career element in here as well. So you'd studied and you'd gone to work in the oil and gas industry, like on these boats that are doing seismic blasting as the marine fauna observer. So before we talk about what one of those is, can you tell us what seismic blasting is?
Absolutely. Again, excellent research, mate.
Thanks.
Seismic blasting is the search for oil and gas beneath the seafloor. You jump on a vessel and they run transects through the ocean, emitting a blast into the ocean every 10 seconds. And now that blast is louder than an atomic bomb. And recent surveys have been, up to 100, 200, 300 days of blasts every 10 seconds, all day, all night, all week, all month. And while I was out there, my job was to protect whales. It was to keep an eye out for them. If I saw a whale, they would shut down operations because that blast would impact their ability to navigate and communicate and feed. But only whales were affording any protection out there. I decided to leave that industry because although there was only a little bit of research when I left, everything in my body told me that this wasn't a good thing to do. Sound does not attenuate under long distances in the ocean. It can be heard across oceans. So if we have a blast here in New Zealand or Australia, it is heard in Antarctica. This is a really impactful process. And the fishing industry incentivized a lot of research in this space. They catalyzed a lot of research. And since then, we've found every single species that has been researched in and around Australia is impacted by seismic blasting. So unfortunately, that's only limited to to commercially valuable species. But the more we learn, the worse this practice is. That is where I started my career in the oil and gas industry. It was exceptionally well paying, which is the draw card for most of us. But after I facilitated that, I had a lot of work to undo the impact I enabled. And a few years ago, I joined Surfrider Foundation Australia as their campaign manager, and we bet the drum about this. We toured and told everyone about it, and the way in which I found really effective was to ride my bike to do so. So rather than jumping on a plane or driving to these locations that we were sharing this knowledge, I would be riding my little stigmata here and there. It turned out to be like a 4,000 kilometre trip to do that, which again is part of the adventure. People resonate with bikes. Everyone can do it. It's this leveler. It's not threatening to chat to someone on a bike in a cafe. So I could breach these divides to raise awareness about seismic blasting, this atrocious practice that is going on today. And there's plans to do a lot more. So awesome adventure, huge outcome. But seismic blasting is, anyone that learns about it is mortified that this is happening, but it's over the horizon, so it's out of sight and out of mind. This needs to be banned in Australian waters, or all waters preferably. New Zealand banned it many years ago because of those impacts. We've still got a fair way to go in Australia, given our dependency on resources offshore.
Yeah, and you were quite timid, I think, initially in your approach to being critical of this industry, right? I think you were a bit nervous about it. There was a fear there. How do you get from being kind of scared to stand up for what you believe in to doing what you've subsequently done? What enabled you to move from I'm scared of the oil and gas industry to right, I'm going to throw everything at them? That's a important question. And I think the fear of speaking up is what many of us feel, and so we don't. But silence has consequences. And I thought I'd get shot. Really?
It's a really powerful industry. It's an incredibly influential industry. I thought I'd honestly get shot for talking about this stuff and rattling the cage. Not only that, I'm non-confrontational. I really do not enjoy rattling cages or disagreeing or just having arguments. They're horrifying to me. I want everyone to have a great time. However, again, coming back to what I feel like my calling is, my purpose, it's to stand up for all, especially those things or entities that don't have a voice, and not just humans. So again, with my experience on the water, I'd seen so much degradation. I knew there's almost no one better placed to speak to these topics than someone that stood on those vessels and has a scientific degree and the credibility that comes with that. But also, hopefully, someone that it's not natural or comfortable for me to stand up in front of a crowd to speak about something that is against the status quo and that jobs rely on. And I've got friends in the industry, it's really, and they're not bad people. They're just doing what is important to them, like putting food on the table of their families. And that's part of this solution, is finding a mutually beneficial pathway. But that was a huge hurdle for me, was to overcome my own fear of just upsetting others. But bigger than that is the call to stand up for what's right. And that's often never easy. And I think once I started doing that, and it caused a whole bunch of, I lost a lot of friends and burnt a lot of bridges. I could never go back and work in that industry because, you're a whistleblower. And I quickly, rapidly found my people. And so people found out that I was speaking up about this rather quietly at first, but then it got bigger with the need for someone to do so. Quite unwillingly was forced to do social posts and create events at my local pub to talk about this weird thing that no one had ever heard about before. But then Surfrider heard about it, and they reached out and offered to help and support, and why don't we make a movie about this, and why don't we go out there and film and talk to your experiences of what it's like being on those vessels where you can't call it seismic blasting. It's an acoustic signal, and it's not, a air gun. It's an acoustic source. Like the power of language that is used by these industries is so influential, and their argument and rhetoric of there is no evidence to suggest that there is any impact with this seismic blasting process, but the research hadn't been done. So they weren't incorrect. They just hadn't done it, and they certainly weren't going to fund it or let any scientists on their boat to do the research, because these vessels are in the magnitude of $500,000 a day to operate.
Wow.
Like, it is enormous figures. And I think stepping into what I knew what was right was so like that. There's those moments in your life where things completely change. And that was one of them for me. And part of that, again, that meditation of sitting there and listening to all these voices, but your own. Like, if you listen, when I listened to my own, I knew that I needed to say what I believed. And it wasn't for personal gain. If it was personal gain, I'd still be out there earning bank. But I think that self-sacrifice is influential as well. And again, it's enabled the most connective relationships, the most profoundly important, good relationships out of that, and opportunities that have flown on from it that you'd never foresee. But one of the most important decisions I've ever made is to stand up against something I knew that was wrong.
Yeah, and I think another important decision was combining this passion to improve things and bikes and kind of putting them together. Was the north to south from tip to tail of New Zealand, was that the first time you'd kind of done that? And where did that thought come from?
It was most definitely combining all the fun things all together. So
yeah, why not?
There's a lot of burnout in the activist space. Everywhere around me, I was watching people go hard, but then drop off the face of the earth because it's exhausting. Your heart's in it. And so how could I make that more sustainable? How could I go for decades working on things I deeply care about? And for me, it was riding a bike and surfing and being in these places that recharge me and that really foster that deep care for place. And New Zealand just does that to a whole nother level. It is stunning. If anyone's ever been, that's hard to leave. And so with the idea to ride from the northern tip to the southern tip of New Zealand, it was fostered in, rather than flying, why don't I just ride my bike wherever I can, whenever I can, to reduce my kind of footprint. And, there's a few other things here and there that you can do, but it's an imperfect, challenge, and we all do our best where we can. But that was the start of a absolute journey, hey. One, I'd never ridden on the road before, Cape Reinga, so that was a bit of learning. Someone gave me a mirror early, thank God, so I could see cars coming behind on very narrow roads in New Zealand. There's not much give. And just day by day was having the time of my life. And I utilised that trip as a fundraiser for these causes that I wasn't present for. I wasn't on the ground. I wasn't in community speaking to those issues, but I could do it through different avenues. I could do it over social media, which actually has a almost greater influence in many circumstances and a greater reach. So I think it's not the golden bullet, but it's part of the solution here, and hence taking that learning forward in everything I do now. However, I think, again, by pulling the bike into these conversations, one, you've got a lower impact than driving around and flying around. But two, it starts conversations like, why would you do that? And, have you heard about this issue over there? It's pretty pretty awful, but there's solutions and there's things that we can do about it. And it started this snowball effect of how you can bring in these platforms and privileges, like a Guinness World Record attempt, that gets far more people involved than just bike riders. People I didn't know from every world and every demographic are like, Guinness World Record, that's cool. Why would you do that? And then you can talk about the importance of giving back to the places that we get to play in. It's an awesome segue. It's all like almost like masquerading these environmental campaigns with like physiological challenges. But New Zealand started it, and then that raised funds for old growth protection in Tasmania and also seismic blasting in Australia. And then I dialed that right up when I decided to ride from Mexico to Canada through America. At that time, there was desperate need for awareness around a seismic blasting proposal in Australia, the biggest one on the planet ever. They wanted to blast 7.7 million hectares, which is bigger than Tasmania, just off the coast, over marine parks, over whale sanctuaries. It was an atrocious proposal, but that ride was helped bring awareness to it. And luckily during that ride, it toppled it over with us again, the help of a small army, a lot of people on the ground, a lot of very tenacious volunteers. But I would hope to think that bringing my passion to those causes in such a weird and wonderful way helped in some small way.
I want to talk a bit about the impact on you as well, because I think like you started off at the top of New Zealand. I think in your own words, you weren't an athlete, you weren't fit, you'd never really ridden on the road, you'd never been bikepacking before. You chipped up on, were you on a Nomad or something? I
was on a Nomad, the only bike I had.
On a Nomad with a trailer on the back with your surfboard hanging off of it, and did that ride. And I would assume that by the time, what was it, a couple of months that you got to the southern tip of New Zealand, you were probably quite a different human.
That was a journey of a lifetime. I'd never done anything like that. I, again, had never ridden on the road. I certainly never towed a trailer. There was a lot of learning on that first day about where to put the weight so you don't get speed wobbles. But it wasn't only an external journey through New Zealand. That was a deeply intrinsic journey. Who I set out as on day one was an entirely different person to that last day. And it's like, I get quite emotional even thinking about this. Every day you're getting fitter. You're just pumped on endorphins. And where you think your limit is, your capacity is, it's like at 30 or 40 or 50% of the reality. And riding a bike, especially in that format of multi-day, and I don't have a time frame, I just had an A to B, but often you couldn't find a campground. So you just, or a appropriate place to wild camp. So you just keep going and you end up, day one was only a few kilometres. I was pretty excited, so I did 100 for the first time in my life. I had a good tailwind, mate. It wasn't all the legs. But, went from averaging 30 Ks a day to you could do 100 Ks comfortably before breakfast on the last few days. Your fitness is off the charts. And I didn't know I could do that physically. Again, these limiting beliefs of who you are and what you're capable of are just they're limiting beliefs that I don't know where came from, but they certainly weren't mine. And in a place like New Zealand, you're looking around everywhere, you're alone, and you're asking yourself the question, where is everyone else? What? This is incredible. I've never had more profound, phenomenal experiences than this ride. And there's no one else out here. It was such an epic time. that personal journey, and it catalyzed so many ideas of how can I keep this momentum going. Some days you'd be working outwards and trying to get these little PBs, but so often you're breaking down internal barriers as well, and having a good old weep on your bike about this memory that you had no idea existed from when you were 4. It's such a beautiful process out there, and you're constantly connecting with people in cafes and on the road, and generosity is left, right and centre. People want to showcase their town to you as you pass through. They offer up beds and backyards and cars and tours, and what do you need? Let me look over your bike. The generosity out there completely redefined my belief in humanity. We're told on the news every day of all the things going wrong, and my experience consistently, without a single exception, is that the world is phenomenal and good, and people are incredibly generous. And being a solo female, the very first question I was asked or told is one that is dangerous: prepared to get raped and killed. Of course, not many people will go out with that kind of support network, but that was 9 out of 10 comments was warnings. Wow. And going out there and doing that, I wouldn't hesitate to recommend other single women have a go. Obviously, take care. Obviously, have a life tracker. Keep in touch with people you care about. Let them know where you are. But don't let that fear stop you from doing something incredible. It's a life-changing experience. And New Zealand, there's almost no better place for it. Towns are 20 k's away. You can restock the entire time. You don't have to carry much. There's wild camping everywhere, and the people are just phenomenally welcoming, as they have been everywhere. Highly recommended jumping on a bike and seeing where it leads you.
Yeah, and it seemed to change your mindset, your headspace, because I think it was fairly quickly after that you were like, okay, what's next? And Everest was on the cards. And I think this time purely, selfishly is not the right word, but you wanted to do this for yourself to prove what you could do and to push yourself beyond limits. I think you decided that you were going to go beyond an Everest, but not really told anyone else in the lead up as well, right? It's crazy to think that you can get in that mindset where you're just like, right, I'm going to do an Everest. Well, maybe that's not quite enough. I'll add on a bit more just to really challenge myself. You were in an amazing space, I guess.
Mate, that's what this ride was proving to me consistently, is that I could do far more than I thought I could. Always. There's always more in the tank. And after the ride from the northern tip to the southern tip of New Zealand, I was like, I'm never going to be fitter than this. This is as good as it gets. I might have to go back to work, or I might get sick. Who knows? Utilize this fitness while you can to do this goal that I had never conceived was ever possible, which for me at the time was the hardest thing I could do on a bike, was an Everest. And again, Queenstown, there's vert everywhere. So what better backyard to have an attempt? And I decided to go up Coronet Peak, which is sealed and was a bit more conducive to my baseline of fitness, given I just spent forever on the roads. And so, headed up to Coronet Peak. It was going to be, I think 11 laps or something to get it done. But when I was researching the Everests, I was like, a few people went to 10,000 meters. And instantly, there was no question I was going to do 10. I didn't want this effort to be extrinsically motivated like the New Zealand trip had been. Because it was a fundraiser, I could always lean on the cause to fuel me on low days. This isn't about me, it's for the trees or for the ocean. Whereas the Everest, I didn't want to be external. I wanted to see whether I could do this and whether I had the drive when there was no one watching, whether I could see this out when it got hard, when it got painful. And so I told a few people because I needed to get advice on, how how to pace myself or what to eat. And some locals here, Ben Hildred was a really key help there. He's just obviously the GOAT in this space. But he was really helpful. He came up and joined me for some laps and told me what I needed to hear, which was like, you've got this and you've got more than you realise. Like, as long as you can do a quarter or a third on a long day, you've got the whole thing in one push. So that's what I trained for and went up there. My gosh, an epic day on a bike. And again, I got to the Everest and it was cold and dark and there was a silly amount of people out there helping me. And I was like, guys, we're not done. We're still going. And those last few laps were really difficult. It's when the snow came. It's when hypothermia hit for me on one of the descents and I couldn't get warm. And Lou Ferguson mobilised and Vaughan Collins mobilised. They went out and got wardrobes full of stuff for everyone on the hill, and I couldn't even work my zipper. Like they had to get me dressed and changed and then carry on and pedalled up a few more times to hit 10,000. But again, I couldn't have done any of this without that team. I genuinely would have quit because I could not make sense of the world for a window there. I was too cold. That it's wild how these things snowball, hey? Like, who would have thought? And again, like, you just look at what's possible, literally. And if something is impossible, you go have a go at that too. Because there's literally, I couldn't find my limit and started to realise, like, oh, my limit is death. Like, you literally can push your brain or body until it can't go any further. Like, that's the real limit here. And I think that's an incredibly empowering learning that I've taken to back into the causes as well. Like with stamina and endurance and like those voices that are telling you you're doing the wrong thing, this isn't right. Like all the, again, handbrakes are on of like all the reasons you shouldn't be doing it. Those voices know every weakness you've got. And to keep going because you've committed to it. That's an awesome learning curve and an awesome muscle to flex and strengthen.
Yeah, it just gives you more confidence, which I guess that was the thinking then behind the original 24-hour record attempt was like, okay, well, let's go again and do something.
It had been such an epic summer, like riding through New Zealand, doing the 10,000 metres vert. What's the next obvious thing is like, what's the equivalent downhill? What is possible downhill? Reece Ellis and Simon French from Medina had just done a 24-hour downhill fundraiser in Medina. Okay. So that was at the forefront of my mind and I did some research. Okay, like what's the world record? What's actually possible out there? And I immediately learned that there was no female record at all. There was a couple of gentlemen that held the record. It had been broken a few times, but it was held by a couple of gentlemen in Europe. I think they did it at Schladming. And I was like, well, applied for the female record. I was like, there is none. So low-hanging fruit here. Like,
let's go.
Instantly get a world record. Tick. Like, epic. The ultimate limiting belief is, that's verifiable. That's credible. And but it was also really easy being the female because there wasn't any other competitors. But they would only recognise it if it was 30,000 metres. So that was 72 laps of Coronet Peak. I realised like, okay, I need to do 14.5 minute laps up at Coronet Peak to get the female world record. And we went up there. I was pretty prepared. We do a lot of riding here in Queenstown, so the foundation was pretty strong. A little bit of conversion from Everesting to downhill, but it doesn't take long in a place like this. So shook the hands out and hit the mountain. We got the female record in 13 hours. So that was, I was like, well, there's still 11 hours that we can ride, guys. Like, why not go for the male record too? And so we kicked on and the Coronet Peak team up there sped the chairlift right up. So the lap times got really, really fast. And it was torrential rain on this one. We didn't see that coming, actually. It was a bit unforecast. But it got horrifying, those last 20 laps. But we got the male record, which was 100 laps in 18 hours. And that's when I stopped. So I knew that there was still about 6 hours.
So you're always going to have to go back, right?
I was always coming back. You can't let that one just, melt away when you know that you can do more and that there's more available. The hill can give more. But not only that, it wasn't enough for me to just go back and get a number. I had the Guinness World Record. I didn't need the title. It was more, how can I utilize that tagline of a Guinness World Record to bring heat to an issue that needs help here? And again, giving back to this local community, we have so many opportunities as athletes to be of service, and not just service ourselves, but utilize those platforms and this privilege of support to give back to the communities or the environment we have the utter privilege of being in. And Coronet Peak, there's a big reforestation effort going on, but they need a lot of help. So that was a really obvious one to give back to the Monga, to give back to the mountain. That has given me so much. With the 10,000 metres, with the first world record, I've been taking from these beautiful part of the world. How can I turn the table and also showcase to others what can be done with these epic, fun adventures? They can be bigger than us.
Yeah, good on you. So you mentioned earlier that you'd been involved in this film with the Surfrider Foundation, which I think was called Southern Blast, which is incredible, really good watch if people want to find out more about the seismic blasting and the impact and some of the research that's been going on. You can find that on YouTube. But you very deliberately, I think, put the bike into the promotional tour for that film around Australia. Were you confident at that point that bike was going to add something? Because obviously you're at a film showing, I guess, every evening. You're having to do stuff and bring energy, and you're also then choosing to spend energy all day by going from venue to venue by bike, which I think was like 4,000 kilometre trip or something. So it's a very almost risky decision, but you obviously had a belief that you could bring something by going that way, and I think looking from the outside, it definitely did, right?
I did a bit of research in the early days of conceptualizing this plan, and I quickly learned that Pink Bike is one of the biggest sporting platforms on the planet. Bike riding is one of the biggest demographics on the planet. It is an incredible tool for outreach. And if I could bring that audience to a campaign that needs help, that is a hugely powerful voice. And so after learning in New Zealand the connectiveness of a bicycle, the fact that you can bring a really fun tool to a heavy topic, it made a lot of sense to me, especially when we're advocating for a reduction and a transition out of fossil fuels, because that is what seismic blasting is all about. It's about like the elongation of a dying industry. So bringing a bike to the conversation made so much sense to me. I looked at the map and we had our nightly viewings of Southern Blast from Tasmania to Queensland and then back south again. So I did the math and I looked at the distances that I'd have to be travelling and whether I could reach each and every viewing and showing and like on the bike, whether it was physically possible. And there was a couple that I'd struggled to make, but every other location I could. So I had no real excuses. I very, very generously was helped by Santa Cruz. They gave me a stigmata. I was going to do it on the Nomad if I had to. Again, it was the bike of choice for me. I loved it, but it would have been so tough on those highways. So they gave me a gravel bike, and because it was supported, I could give all my stuff most of my stuff to the crew that would having to get there other ways. Not everyone can ride the bike. So I was often a lot lighter and often had accommodation as well. Some long stints, you carried everything in the tent, but started off in the southernmost tip of Tasmania and rode to every screening bar one, which was 13 screenings, and far out. This is where the daily sharing came in as well, to tell the journey, to share the journey of the bike ride up Australia through social media platforms. And so every day, it's like, day one, heading off from the southern tip. I'm on my bike. This is horrifying. I have no idea what to expect. Let's go. And would share the daily ride. And holy moly, the momentum that built from people getting to follow your silly undertaking of huge days, followed by sharing a documentary and then standing on stage being like, hey, I'm Annie. This is what Seismic is. And what questions do you have? It was exhausting. Like, I have never been as tired as I was on that trip, and everything gave for that trip. It was absolutely worthwhile. I wouldn't change a thing because of the outcome of that. But in terms of the energy requirements, the social requirements, I was drained from every tank. And the outcome of that was having shared the journey on a daily basis resulted in this gaining so much momentum, and then media jumped on board, and it was just awesome to see this take its own, just snowball in its own way. But God, riding, and then you've got radio interviews and people are asking where you are so they can meet you on the side of the road to do a quick, chat to the local radio or film crew. Or it just got wild, and I don't know how. To be honest, I did that. It was crazy. Again, it worked. Like it helped, and I took a while to recover from that. A few good months of absolutely nothing but chilling and hanging out here in Queenstown. But it was worth every effort, because the outcome of that campaign resulted in the proposal, the biggest one on earth ever, getting cancelled. So that when that news came through, that seismic blasting proposal was cancelled, the 7.7 million hectares, I don't think I could possibly have a better day of my life. Where, how on earth do you trump that? How on earth do you, that much ocean saved and protected? There is no, I don't know how to beat a day like that news coming through. And I'm so proud of the team, and every late night, every argument, people are absolutely exhausted and fuses are running short, and we all paid personally to see that tour through, but it was worth it.
And you must have got some pretty significant joy out of it, because you kind of went again, like you say, with the Mexico to Whistler trip. Admittedly different, right? You're not touring a film, but you're making a point in a very similar way. You're doing your daily updates. How was it transplanting this kind of model that you've founded in New Zealand and Australia and moving it to the other side of the planet? Because different cultures, different places, different people. How did it feel doing it somewhere completely different? Because I think it was your first time in North America as well, right?
It was the algorithm of the daily share. I think these platforms really like daily updates that just blast it to everyone. No one can hide from me. It's actually really gnarly, but it worked. It brought heat to these campaigns, these issues that needed awareness around them. And so I did take that same algorithm to North America. It was a place that I, first and foremost, really wanted to ride. There's a self-serving element to all of these things. I really enjoy riding my bike, and it was wonderful to be able to. The seismic blasting campaign hadn't been won at that point when I went to America, so that was still the big topic of conversation and fundraising and education. So the daily sharing was absolutely part of it. But I think because of that, people can tell where you are. The opportunities of local engagement are so incredible. The bike community is unlike anything else I've ever experienced. Going through New Zealand, I had the surfboard on me, but it was the bike community that would religiously reach out and offer local tours and what do you need? How can I help? Here's my house. Like they're phenomenal and tried and tested. I can say that with absolute certainty. The same happened the entire way through America. It is an incredible way to travel. It is, your fitness goes through the roof. It's first and foremost absolutely wonderfully fun. What I learned from the Australia ride was to not have a time frame. Because of the screening dates every night, there was an element of hustle, there was an element of pressure. And that I did struggle with the expectation of, hey guys, please let me ride this. I promise I'll be functional the entire time. And then you had to be functional the entire time. So when you showed up, I was still working. Like I had to perform and deliver deliverables and stand up there with a microphone, which is the last thing you want to do after 120 Ks on a bike. Yeah. You just want to go home and have a shower, but you rocked up greasy, covered in sweat and sunscreen, and you talk to this issue, and then you'd stick around answering questions because people wanted to talk about it and understand more. So hard, but again, important and good and worthy. I took that learning from not having those timeframes, not having those pressures back into America. As long as the A and B is there, you can wiggle your way around. If you're tired, you can sleep. If it's pouring rain, you can hang out and in the library or, go for a surf. It's really nice to take away that pressure of expectation of where you have to be when you have to be there.
How do you keep your bike safe? This is the thing I always wonder, because you've never done this on some shonky thing that no one's going to try and steal. You've always done it on a nice shiny Santa Cruz. Like, how do you keep it safe?
Oh, I think you read the room often. Okay. Obviously, I can't have my bike in my tent. It's always on show. And I think, again, this is where people religiously prove me wrong, is I do come in with like, oh gosh, one day I'm going to walk out and the bike's not going to be there. It's certainly never been the case. Certain locations I would get accommodation. So in places like Mexico and Tijuana, I didn't wild camp. I stayed in accommodation, and my bike was in there with me. But almost everywhere else, I would be in a campground or wild camping, and I would always lock my bike. But my bikepacking lock is like this piece of string. It's just like, it's not actually, but it's very, very light and narrow, and it's so easy to cut. I think that layer of please don't is good to have. And in New Zealand, to be honest, like the whole South Island, I didn't lock my bike once. Like on the North Island I did. I kind of got these vibes of and again, not recommending, it's just that's the risk I run. It's always calculated. But I'm very trusting as well. Very, very trusting. A couple of things in Mexico I went in with around Tijuana again was covering the bike as much as possible. The bikepacking gear does that quite well. Yeah. And I had a second wallet on me that I could hand over if I was mugged. And then I never wore any nice clothes in certain areas. So there's calculation, and I hustle through areas I don't feel entirely safe. There's only been a couple of those. Tijuana is one of them. And there's a location up north, I can't remember the town in New Zealand, where I got followed one morning after arriving really early. And it was Saturday night, so people were on the piss, and I just went and found a gym and hung out there until daylight. And people are wonderful when you ask for help. Like you're just this solo human on a bike looking exceptionally vulnerable. So I think people really go above and beyond. And the opposite is true. Like people do go insanely far out of their way to make sure you are safe, to make sure you're secure, to make sure you're happy, that you have everything you need. And more people are worried about my bike than I am, I think. Okay, I've just only ever been proved correct when it comes to trusting humanity.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's really cool to hear. And you arrived at the end of that trip in Whistler, but not just Whistler on any day of the year. It was Whistler during Crankworks. Like, you couldn't have picked a more hectic space to drop into. What was it like coming off being on your own for however many weeks you were on the road doing that? Like, it was, what was it, a month and a half or something, to then drop into Whistler on Crankworks week. And I think you were involved in some events and stuff as well. It wasn't just a free pass to hang out.
That was very intentional as well, to arrive for Crankworks, to utilise the momentum of one of the biggest bike events on the planet to, again, talk about the why and to raise awareness about seismic blasting. Everything has an element of agenda behind it with these trips. Similarly, on the west coast of America, I'd be going through the Santa Cruz headquarters. I'd be going through some key locations to help raise a profile of these important issues. So arriving in Crankworks in Canada at the end of the trip was just the ultimate, because all your mates are there. They came and rode out. Shram and Santa Cruz rode out with me. We all rolled in and there was a big welcoming party, which I had no idea was planned. It was just sensational. But you're right, after spending 3 months alone on my bike and had never ridden a day with anyone outside of Santa Cruz, it was very intense, especially because we'd ridden from Squamish to Whistler that day, and it was very hot. We were talking like mid-30s, and then Longhorn put on an epic event for us. But I was a shell of a human. I was so exhausted, and I got off on the table and we did the whole champagne gun. It was a lot of fun. But I was like, I just gotta go and lay down, guys. I couldn't drink. I couldn't have I just needed to chill out and absorb the fact that we'd finished and we'd done it and we'd raised more than the target. It was an outstanding day in every way, shape and form. We jumped in the lakes. We had a fun day. But then it was straight into Crankworks week. So again, I had never been to North America before. Everything was brand new. I was like, this is Disneyland. It's huge. There's people everywhere. The bikes. I've never seen so many bikes in my life. And people knew who you were. It was really weird because you've been anonymous. But the bike industry had been really ramping this up too, which is so kind. So it was wild to be recognised in the park or in the local bike shop or at the hotel. Very, very strange feelings, but epic. There was a few podcasts done up there. We did a group ride. We did the SRAM all-day ride, which was, I was a bit of a, I was getting dragged up some hills because I was very tired that week. I'd hustled to get to Crankworks in time, so had a few days of heat stroke and vomiting, and I was a bit of a, needed a good recovery week there, which was obtained before adventuring around Canada. But damn, Crankworks is that pilgrimage. Hey, it's such a fun experience, and the people are, there's so many events and so much to do. You're just strapped for too many options. That's your problem. It's great.
Amazing. And you're right. I mean, you do stand out, right? I think you're in a group of one in the mountain bike world. Like, there aren't any other Annie Fords out there, which means you can stand out and you can have this huge impact. And I was thinking a little bit about how that kind of came together. And obviously there's a big element of your personality and your passion and your dedication in that. But
thank you.
I think a big part of it is that you found a way to combine a number of things that you love, which also makes you unique. Like, there's no one else that has this skill set and this combination of stuff. How do you think about that? Like, what do you attribute your kind of success to? Because it has been successful, right? You've completed a number of big challenges. You've created loads of awareness for these causes that are super important by riding a bike, surfing, and admittedly, like you said, there's a selfish element to it. Like, you love doing these things, you want to do them. How do you look at it?
I absolutely can't take credibility and sole credibility for these ideas and these outcomes. I think, again, by stepping into things that you care about, whatever that may be, that authenticity and that risk results in those that align with you gravitating to you. And then it takes on its own forms and ideas grow and you form a community around those values. And so it's not outrageous or it's not different, but the way that I choose to express that is unique to me, and I lean on what I feel my skills are. Whether I feel like I struggle, for example, with public speaking. And if someone gave me a gun and told me to public speak, I would have shot myself every time. But when you care about something deeply, it takes your ego out of it. It's not about you. It's about the cause. It's not about the likes or the follows or the numbers or the sponsorships. It's about the cause, genuinely. And every single decision I make goes back to that why. Like, my life is most fulfilling when I'm of service to others. This feels most aligned and impactful when I'm helping or protecting the environment and giving back to these incredible places. Everyone wins when we have a more biodiverse home, or water we can drink, or air we can breathe without risk of getting ill. If I fall back to that purpose, it's easy to do these things and the ideas flow. But while you're out there on your bike, this is where those ideas are formed. If you've got all day on your bike thinking and reflecting on things you care about and being offered generosity in everywhere you turn, the world is not a scary place. It becomes an incredibly welcoming and warm and a world of opportunity. And that's an inspiring space to operate in. And I think who I can attribute to that back to is, like, one, I had an incredible family. I'm told that I am loved within every conversation I have with my parents. I have a phenomenal support network. The caliber of humans in my tight crew is just next level. We build each other up left, right, and centre. We call and tell each other and celebrate one another's wins. There's no judgment. There's no comparison. That's only like, I am stoked for you. And how can I help? Do you need help? How can we make this bigger and better? It is an incredible place to operate from. And it's certainly not just me. I have an amazing support network. I have people that I can turn to when I'm having hard days, and we all have them. When I have self-doubt, and I'm reminded what I'm capable of. And then I get to prove to myself that I am capable of things that I would have thought were impossible. And I think the environment we put ourselves in is incredibly important for that, and to not be passive. I often reflect on, whether that I'm doing the right things, whether I'm making the right choices and fostering the right relationships, and I make choices in alignment with what I know is going to have the best outcome for these causes and for that deep inner happiness.
Have you actively had to sort of step away from friendships when they haven't? Because it sounds like you have high standards for these people around you, and rightly so. But the hardest part of that is walking away from those that don't maybe meet those standards.
I have, I think, how we choose to spend our time is one of the most important decisions we make in our life. And I don't think I've necessarily walked away from, I've walked towards certain things. And for example, formerly I was driven towards those conventional definitions of success, like the fancy title, the fat salary, the corner office. And when you get there, you're like, oh, this is miserable. Like, I'm not having a good time. And so when I reflect on what is important to me, my family, my friendships, the things I deeply care about, that being the environment first and foremost, and making choices to foster those, again, it's gravitational, it's magnetic. You find your people in those kind of decisions. And so it's not often that I will have a conversation of like, this behavior isn't serving you or me, and I'm no longer going to tolerate that. That's a very rare conversation. It's more so highlighting and fostering behaviors that I love and draw, like, and leaning in on those relationships and bringing those closer. Yeah. And I think if I don't fuel drama and gossip and I call it out for what it is when it's happening, it's not a blaming thing. It's like, I just don't feed it.
Yeah.
People pick up on that. People are emotionally intelligent. They won't keep talking to you about this non-issue, really, like this tiny little thing over here that's inflamed, if you're not engaging. That's my choices. And I think that's, again, not being confrontational, that works for me. And I'll continue to do that and see where that leads me.
Fair play. Good on you. So what's next, Annie? You strike me as the person that's kind of always got something on the boil. Like, what should we be looking out for?
Oh, mate, there's so much. I think next up, straight off the bat, a ride from Scandinavia to Morocco through Europe. I've never been to Europe.
Okay.
So I'm really excited about exploring the many and varied cultures in such a condensed area.
Yeah.
So I'll get the 5010, the Santa Cruz 5010, short travel this time, a bit friendlier for all the ups and downs to come, and bike pack through similar setup to America and Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah.
And then gallivant around Europe afterwards. There's so much to see and do, so many bike parks I want to check out. Like, I want to hit up Morzine. I would love to get to some World Cups and scream at my mates and turn the tide, like, support the supporters that have been there for me. And then, mate, there's this thing I've got tinkering in the back of my brain. I'd love to surf and sail the world with a bike, and I don't know how to put those things together yet, but that would be cool. I've got all the skill set to do it. It's just I need a boat. If you know a boat, there's someone with a boat that goes, give it to the cause. I promise it'll have a great outcome.
If anyone with a boat is listening, I take it this is like not just a canoe or something. We need
no.
We need a significant,
like it'd be a blue water
like a
sailor,
yacht.
something.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Go gallivanting around the planet with a good adventurous crew and find some pretty. I feel like there's so many places that you could ride that are completely untouched yet, like that we haven't, the free ride lines, or we've got our kind of pilgrimage sites, but there's a lot more out there that I think would utterly deliver on the adventure fun spectrum. So
for sure. Well, we'll start wrapping up, but before we ask our final 4 questions, any advice you'd give to people who are maybe feeling a little bit kind of lost or conflicted and trying to find their own way to living a more fulfilled life? Is there anything that you would tell them to go do? Maybe a 10-day silent meditation retreat. It's a kind of full-on way to approach it, but
it was honestly a massive catalyst in my life. My goodness, that's an excellent question. Ooh. I think getting out there and getting out in our environment is a really beautiful recharger and an excellent grounder. And that's an important place for most, and certainly for me, to reflect on what's important to me. That gives us perspective. These environments that we've created that are very hard and vertical, and cities aren't that inspiring for me. So I find these values and pathways show themselves when I'm out there, and they didn't come to me when I was sitting at a desk. And not only that, it's finding space and quiet to really reflect on that. We've got so many distractions in this day and age, and far out. Social media can be a great tool, but it is utterly destructive as well if you don't manage its influence on you and your time. It is a black hole of productivity and self-worth often. So managing and being aware of what is good for us and what isn't, and making disciplined choices around those and sticking to them, is a really great foundation and kind of like base from which to make those kind of decisions. But God, just get after it. Just start. Like, take your step. You're going to mess up. You're going to make bad decisions, but it's like learning how to get back up and have another go is the most important thing I've learned. It's getting out there and following. We've all got intuition and a calling. It's just like once you feel it and find it and back it and jump, the rest takes its own momentum. But taking that first step in the direction that is yours, not another's, is the most courageous thing we can do.
Yeah, I like that a lot. All right, we'll hit up our final four. The first one of those, if our listeners had £150 to spend to improve their performance on a bike, which is about 330 New Zealand dollars, what would you recommend they go spend it on?
Oh, mate.
A rear view mirror.
Honestly, the rear view mirror is like more important than a helmet to me.
And did
like,
you have a little radar rear light thing as well?
I did. Garmin donated a rear view light for the America trip, and the rear view light and mirror combo were honestly lifesavers. I 100% would either be seriously injured or dead rather than having this conversation with you without those two pieces. And a mirror is like $15. Like, mate, you've got a $300 helmet, but it's not going to help you if you're hit by a truck. Like, the mirror will stop that interaction. And It has on multiple occasions. I've ridden off the road so many times because a mirror told me I was about to get hit. Like, I will never go on a highway without one. That is like, it's everything. So yeah, like, you don't need $330. You need, 20. And that's the most important piece of equipment on your bike for anything on a highway.
All right, there we go. Bikepacking, completed it. Tick. Next one. If you could wind back the clock and sit down with yourself, age 16, what advice would you give her?
Oh, these are great questions. I should have researched these. It would be, I think it comes back to that fear and not letting other people's projection of fear influence your decisions beyond what the weight that it should be holding, rather than letting that determine your decisions. Put fear in its place, which is so rarely first. It's have a go, have a crack, and let the world prove you wrong. Like, we're so conditioned to fear and a lack of trust in one another. And that unfortunately determines so many of our decisions. Trust your gut and your interactions with actual people.
First time we've had that answer. I like that. Nice work. All right, third one. If you could have a coaching session with anyone, past or present, who would it be and what would you want to learn from them? Stephen Hawking's.
Okay. I'd love to pick his brains about.
Scientist inside you's there.
Yep, the big questions. Either that or Gandhi.
Okay.
Just centered, soulful, wise human being.
Yeah. Plenty to learn from both, I'm sure.
Oh.
All right, last one. Hopefully this one's an easy one for you. Something that you do every day that you feel benefits you.
Morning practice every morning. I don't touch my phone. I get my journal. I write 3 things down that I'm stoked about or super grateful for. That sets my day up every day. And
is it that simple? That is the whole practice?
That is actually that simple. If I'm feeling really energetic and I've got heaps of time, I'll go like hang out and do some yoga on the deck for like literally 10 minutes because I'm lazy. Don't do much more than 10 minutes. But yeah, before I won't touch my phone before I've done like, and it's like 3 lines. It's just like so quick. But it's a game changer in terms of
what impact do you find that has on you?
One, I'm not drawn to my phone all day. I think where we start our day is a really important setup. I've instantly looked after myself and my brain. So there's a evidence I can turn to of self-care, which is self-respect and self-worth and like all the things you need to be a good human on the planet. And looking around, there's only things to be stoked about here. Like if you're finding shit to complain about in the morning, like there's some serious rewiring that needs to occur. It's such an easy thing to do. And yet we get in these narratives of what's wrong, stuff to complain about, thinking about what others think about us. Like our brains are wired to find problems. They're amazing problem solvers. But often that's insanely outweighed in the direction of negativity. And once it's a rapid, just try it for literally 2 or 3 days, you'll notice the impact. It's so rapid and hugely impactful to your entire day.
Love it. So simple. Amazing. Annie, it's been an absolute pleasure sitting down and hearing your story so far. I'm looking forward to seeing what you end up doing next and which causes you champion along the way. If people want to follow you, where's the best place for them to be looking?
It's Annie401 on socials. But honestly, Chris, like wonderful time. Thank you for your beautiful questions. Well researched. They're an absolute pleasure to chat to. And what a joy. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Annie. It's an absolute pleasure. I'll stick links in the show notes. People can find your Instagram. I'll stick a link to the film as well that you guys made because it's a really interesting watch. Keep us up to date with what you're up to and look forward to seeing how the next adventure goes for you.
Will do, mate. Have a great day. Thank you.